People in the back of the room.
Well, one's a staff.
Right.
So we'll call to order the Rice Creek Board of Managers regular meeting on July 26, 2023. It's 9 a.m. We're in the Shoreview City Hall Council chambers. We first reflect that Manager Robertson is, with prior notice, absent. She's doing her responsibilities as one of her other public officials for the city of Blaine.
So, Mr. President, I'd appoint Manager Wagaman as temporary secretary.
What a wonderful idea, Mr. Wagaman. You accept being president?
Yeah.
Temporary secretary?
Sure. I'm not sure what that
Right.
entails, but I guess I'm secretary.
Do you need a motion for that?
It would be best.
I
Okay.
move it.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none.
For clarity, it's
Congratulations.
Thank you, Manager
pro
Waller.
tem.
Pro tem. Okay. Any changes to the agenda?
President Bradley, Board of Managers, staff proposed to amend the agenda. New item 2 under items for discussion and information, that is the district work for Minnesota watersheds and the resolutions. So a little follow-up discussion from our past meeting.
All right. Any other changes by anyone? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Mr. Chair, so move.
I'll second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Passes. Patrick?
Nope.
Oh, approval of
Minutes.
minutes, I'm sorry. Well, we don't have Commissioner Roberts, or Manager Robertson here to do that for us, so someone else is going to have to be
That's
responsible.
what
can
the
handle
Secretary
that.
Pro Em
Yeah,
does.
there you go. Okay.
Mr. President, I move to approve the July 10th, 2023 workshop and the July 12th, 2023 regular meeting minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, passes. Now we get to Patrick on the consent agenda.
Yes, President Bradley, Board of Managers, staff have one application for your consideration today. Staff is presenting this without changes.
Anyone have questions of Patrick? If not, can I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move the Caprock permit number 23-035.
Second.
All in favor say, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, none, passes. So now we come to open mic. This is the time not for the city to talk to us about, because that's going to come up specifically, but anyone who's in the audience who would like to address us on an item that is not coming up on our agenda. Anyone on the phone? Who do we have? We have Lewis on the phone. Anyone else on the phone?
Nope.
Okay. So moving right along. What do you have next, Mr. Administrator?
Yes, Board President, Board of Managers, next on your agenda, items requiring board action. This is the Rice Creek Watershed District response letter in regards to the Columbus wetland credit request. We do have representatives of the city president, Elizabeth Mersko, the city administrator, and Mayor Preiner, Jesse Preiner. The letter is found in your packet on page 25. Got a few things to say, but I think it's probably best to hear what the city might want to share with us this morning and go from there.
That'd be good. We want to also acknowledge that we have received the letter from the city's attorney, from law firm of Larkin Hoffman, Mr.
Griffin.
William Griffith. And I did speed read it this morning, so I appreciate having received that. Would the city like to present something to us at this time, besides this letter? If you state your name, please, and your position at the city.
Good morning, Mr. President and board managers. My name is Elizabeth Mersko. I'm the city administrator for the city of Columbus. I've been the city administrator for 24 years, so I have a little bit of tenure. And for the topic that I'm going to talk about today, I was actually present at the meeting in 2009 through much of the discussions through those project years. But I'm here today to give you a brief overview of the path that led to where we are today and the request that I'm requesting of both you, Mr. President, and the board managers. I just want to also say that I do appreciate all the time that you've taken. I know I've bended Nick's ear on this project for a number of hours, and I want to make sure that all of you understand that from a perspective, or my perspective, I was there when the project started, and so a lot of us, when we want to start a project, we want to follow it through or see it through. And so I am quite passionate that this project is sought through and that we all get the projects that we wanted, because they were all great projects, come to fruition and have that as a win for all. So briefly, I want to go over just what the city's request is. So the city does not look at this request as, excuse me, as a legal issue, but more of a process and procedure issue. And because the agreement was a voluntary agreement, it was an agreement of cooperation, collaboration, and good faith of government entities coming together. And really, that was my goal at the time. I'm the one that actually put the meeting together, hired the facilitator to facilitate the meeting, and we did it at the Washington County License Center. And it was on my part to bring 5 government agencies together because we all had issues. And I thought, you know what, I can bring a commonality and a thread through all of it and have these projects come together, because there was no 2 entities that could make it happen. We needed all 5 entities to work together to make these projects happen in a very short period of time, or we were going to lose funding and projects were not going to happen. That hardly ever happens. You hardly ever have 5 government agencies in one room talking about things, coming up with a memorandum of understanding, and signing it in a very, like I said, 2 or 3 week period of time. We happen to manage to do that. And today I can say we have some great projects. We have a Howard Lake Bridge overpass, Browns Creek. We had great drainage, projects come out of that. And we have, Rice Creek has the, wetland credits, as a product of that. So I think that we got nothing but wins out of the entire, process that we went through. So in looking at that, Columbus agreed, and this was a critical piece to all parts working together, the sale of 5 acres of upland, because the DNR wanted that 5 acres in the Lamprey Pass Wildlife Management Area, because they felt that improvements needed to be made for hunting. And their number one goal is to promote hunting in the wildlife management areas. We happen to be gifted with 3 wildlife management areas in Columbus, so we're well familiar with those benefits. But for Columbus, that was a developable 5-acre lot. We could have had a residential home built on that lot, and in perpetuity, it was zoned right. In addition, the wildlife management area, which is the whole wildlife management area, was 80 acres in our commercial district, and that generated what we call payment in lieu of taxes. But we knew that unless the property was transferred to Rice Creek, we weren't going to get the drainage projects we wanted, because the DNR didn't want to give out permits. So we needed the cooperation of all of these entities in order for property to exchange hands and for some things to happen in order for the projects to move forward. When we were at the table, I knew I knew a lot about WACA. I knew a lot about sequencing. I've been working with Rice Creek for years, working with Nick and all of your managers to become, I would say, well educated on the Wetland Conservation Act and what is required. So I knew that there was a chance that maybe or maybe not wetland bank credits would be created or wouldn't be created, but I knew it was a long path. I knew it was at least 5 years, and again, knew not the intricate details, but I knew the process. So I knew Columbus was not going to get benefit for quite a number of years, and we were willing to wait for that. So long story short, again, it was a cooperative effort both on all parties to get these projects done. And for Columbus, we felt that we had a loss in tax revenue and also payment in lieu of taxes. And in return, at least at that time, we thought, there in the future sometimes there's going to be credits. We can work something out in the future along with the drainage issues. And we all recognize, maybe all of you have briefly understood, Columbus is 70% wetland or open water. We're well aware of the conservation of wetlands and pristine wetlands. I have a new appreciation for pristine wetlands because we have a lot of those. And so we understood that this was going to take time. And so it did take time, and in I believe in 2017, all those projects were completed, and credits were awarded to Rice Creek. So I know that was a kind of a brief overview, but really the ask today from all of you is the city would like to request a future workshop. And the workshop meeting that we all agreed on a date would be both bodies coming together and saying, okay, so what is the process for a project? What is, how can we allocate and make Columbus whole, considering we feel that we've had a loss? And really coming up with a plan, working with two governmental units, coming together and saying, this is what happened in 2009, this happened along the road, and now we're here in 2024, how can we move forward? So I'm hoping that you will grant us that future workshop. I thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions now or in the coming days if you feel you have questions that need to be answered.
Anyone have questions?
Could I, Mr. President,
Certainly.
could I ask a question? My understanding was that you guys, the city of Columbus, had said no at the end of the process, basically, because that piece of property hadn't been worked out, the Stanky property. I'm getting this from, I talked to Pat, who negotiated for the Watershed, Pat Kreiner, the president. And what I'm questioning is, she told me that it was at the Watershed's behest that they called the city and wanted to negotiate one last time. Is that correct?
I know there were several meetings as to how we were going to move forward. And again, with 5 different entities and having an ask and the city saying yes to that purchase, which is the DNR purchase, there were several discussions, and ultimately our leadership indicated yes, that they would cooperate with the DNR. For those of you who are not familiar, when you have property in a city and the DNR wants to acquire it, they do have to come to the city and ask for that sale. And so it does take approval from the city for that land to be sold. We do have an acquisition agreement with the DNR because, again, we have pristine wetlands and a few other things in Columbus that are of benefit to them. And we work in partnership with them, and we have for years. So in this particular case, it was outside the acquisition plan. So leadership did have to think long and hard whether or not we should sell a property that was in a residential area for housing, or whether we were going to allow the sale of the wildlife management area. Ultimately, they agreed because, again, we were working in cooperation with all the entities, and we really wanted to see all of the projects move forward because there was benefit to the entire area for all of these projects to go forward. And today, we no longer have a traffic problem across any of our bridges, and we have some really good things that happened coming out of those projects. And as you all know, no project that we do doesn't go without a Rice Creek permit, a Coon Creek permit, a permit from Sunrise and Columbus. We have 3 watershed districts that are 2 watershed districts and a WMO that we work with, you know what I mean, side by side when we have projects. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, and can I follow up, Mr. President? What I'm getting at is, to me, what's important is what our president and administrator at the time represented. And my understanding from talking to President Priner at the time, the administrator and
Steve?
the,
Pardon me.
talking
they
to
can't-
Mike.
Yeah. they
I'm
can't-
sorry.
Yeah,
I'm very sorry.
thank you.
My understanding from talking to Mrs. Priner was that they represented to the city that they would get in a room and discuss this at a future date between the two of you, and that never happened, did it?
You know, there was one discussion where we were in a room, and it was with your previous executive director, and why I'm drawing a blank on his name, Nick.
I think it was Doug Thomas.
Doug Thomas was the administrator at the time, but there was a meeting with your predecessor, and I don't know why I'm drawing a
Oh,
blank.
Phil Bellafiore.
Phil Bellafiore, yes. And briefly had a meeting recognizing that the city coming to the Watershed District, which is logged in the materials that you have. So I think we were, you know what I mean, in as the city's perspective, we were always moving forward. Although I don't think, which is why I'm asking for this workshop, I don't think it was ever articulated that, you know, it was articulated that it was project-based, that we just couldn't come in for a permit and not be shovel-ready, because we did try that and that didn't work. And I understand why. I understand the
Yeah.
sequencing. I understand all of the process. But at the time, the details weren't hammered out, and I wish they had been, because we wouldn't be here today if they were. So taking a few steps back, which is why I'm asking for the workshop, I do believe those need to be articulated and agreed upon by all parties and moving forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Administrator, I have a couple comments. Administrator Mersko, your lawyer wrote a letter yesterday and has a last bullet point, which was added obviously after you and I had talked yesterday. It says, in any case, the city would like to submit a specific project in the future for use of up to 3 credits from Browns Creek Preserve for development of drainage project consistent with WACA and the goals of Rice Creek and the city. I applaud that concept. We have 27 cities. This board met and by consensus concurred that we did not have a basis based on 2009, and nothing you've said today has changed that, to make a specific promise to you, and we've got 27 cities to city. We've got other needs of that wetland. Our letter specifically sets forth the factors that we would consider when you brought as a specific proposal, that we would, in good faith, consider at least the following criteria: the number of credits requested, the number of credits available, the existing known and anticipated needs of the district for credits, whether the city is offering to pay market or other value for the credits, and the purpose for which the credits would be used. You've had your workshop. I personally will not
Workshop.
put forward a proposal that we negotiate against ourselves, which is what we would be doing if we were to sit down at a workshop and it opens up and say, well, what do we want? Well, what we want is on this letter. And when you bring that to us, we will have a workshop to evaluate that request based on these criteria. That's my vote. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. President, good morning, Miss Elizabeth.
Good morning.
As I said to you last night when you telephoned me, I wanted to have this discussion in the public meeting so that there wasn't any confusion. I'm easily confused. And I've been on the board 17 years. None of my colleagues here were here at the time we made this situation, including the administrator was different. So it's just in fairness to make sure that's announced, although I was and not a person who was directly involved in it. But I do remember before I was on the board that this was an issue about cleaning Anoka County 15 before I came here and such. So I have some comments here, and I have to say, you keep talking about all parties. I assume you mean Forest Lake also. They're not here, and if you just let me finish, I'll go through my litany of laundry list of things, and you have a chance to rebuttal the affirmative, which you are, always has the last word. And, but Forest Lake was also an essential person, or to the party to that agreement. Now, first of all, I'll let you know, Ms. Elizabeth, I'm going to vote for the letter that's in the packet today, but I really think it's too nice. I do. And the contention that you've made here is that the city of Columbus is essential to making sure that the repair of JD 415. And I think that's a false contention, because we could have just as well gone through a process of condemnation of the property on the Washington County side of Elmcrest, but it would have taken many years. At that time, I believe Columbus was more anxious to get something going. I'd also point out to you that second, that is on my list here of things, Forest Lake has 4 branches of JD4. They're the biggest taxpayer in that watershed, sub-watershed district. And at the time, we were working on branch 1 area and 15. And the individuals that live on branch 1 received 2 special assessments. That was unusual. It didn't happen to anybody else, I don't think. And so I think they have paid more, and so they have a priority to any extra credits that would be there. Since your attorney, when he was here a couple months back, made a point of stating that Forest Lake was entitled to the same benefit that you are claiming for the city of Columbus. Number 2, Columbus has received about 18 credits or so far. My math might be a little bit off, and I'm sure you can correct me, but I think there's 13 or so for the preserve and then another 6. And so Columbus has received credits. They haven't been neglected. Forest Lake has received none, just to point that out. Number 3, I'm going to use some words here, descriptions of land that show my age. But as I recall, I'm what I'm going to call the Tessier farm, because I went to school with Tessiers. We did some work up on that street, and I believe the district replaced every driveway culvert at ad valorem expense, general expense. We did that. Now, I'm not against that. I voted for it, by the way. Just for the record, I didn't vote for the second tax for Forest Lake. I only voted for the first one. And number 4, I think Mr. Thurnbeck's, the turkey farm, I don't think that would have come about without the credits that were created, and part of your 6 there. Number 5, the district provided property. I have forgotten how many acres it is, but it's the northeast corner of that Browns Preserve 80, for Great Rivers Energy to develop a substation there for the purpose of a future power energy needs for the Columbus Industrial Park on the east side, for one place. I'm sure there are other places that'll be used too, but that was there. So that helps replace your 5 acres of tax land, because they do pay taxes. Number 6, the district could have placed that ditch, as I said, on the east side of Elmcrest, but condemnation time would have consumed many, many years, and that wasn't at the time. Number 7, the city has land use authority. You folks out there make permits all the time. You make zoning rules. You could make a rule in your zoning or by special use that any wetland developer that's going to make more pristine, enhanced wetlands could, as you do with a developer, make a donation to the city, just like the park system. You got a guy comes in, he produces a park, he has to produce park or park credits. Number 8, The city itself could develop a wetland bank, as is being done in Lionel Lakes and in Hugo, for example, so that you'd have your own credits. And I think that when you get down to a future workshop where you have all parties, you have neglected my old friends at Forest Lake. And after the last workshop, I stopped by to talk with Patrick Casey, who's the administrator. We've had several administrators at Forest Lake since this was done. We've had several mayors also, which hasn't been necessarily true at Columbus. They've had much more. Miss Elizabeth's been there for a very long time, and continuity helps. Yeah, but he knew nothing about any of this at all. And so, when you're talking about a global or universal workshop and such, and you don't include Forest Lake, but you mention them in your legal letters to they're entitled for this, I feel that Forest Lake has been neglected and not Columbus. I don't feel Columbus has been neglected. I don't feel you've been pushed aside. Like I said, your argument about, or your contention about the loss of the 5 acres was replaced with land out for the new substation in there. Maybe not totally, but some of it. And that the drainage ditch is there. We also even agreed, I think at the time, and still have in mind, that if you ever come up with a final plan, I mean you by the city, not you personally, please, I'm terrible with my pronouns, that the district was going to move the drainage ditch number 15 to the east, so that you'd have, the city would have large, uninterrupted pads for development. But that's contingent on a complete plan to come, not just this parcel's going to go, we can't just move the ditch on this parcel, we have to move the whole thing in the city plan there. So, as I said to you at the beginning, I will vote for the letter, but I think it's too nice.
I think I must be the middle bear, it's just right. Any other questions or comments? I'll give you an opportunity if you wish to
Sure.
come back.
So, thank you, Manager Waller. I do, when I looked at, mentioned all parties earlier, I meant all parties of the MOU. When I request for the future workshop, it was all parties, meaning Rice Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, the City of Columbus, and the Rice Creek staff. So I wasn't including the other entities of the MOU. I do feel that the MOU, when we were negotiating in that room, I think it was a global effort. And I think everyone laid everything on the table of what they felt it was important to them in order to be made whole with the negotiation on how it was laid out. I think for Forest Lake, I know they had drainage issues at the time. I know they wanted a bridge project done because without the Howard Lake Bridge, they couldn't do the Forest Lake Bridge. And I know that they needed additional land in order to do that project. I know the DNR had to sell them land in order for them to do that. In order for them to sell the land to Forest Lake, in order to do the bridge project, the Stanky property, which is the 5 acres in Columbus, had to be acquired. That was as Manager Wagner mentioned, it was a deal breaker for the DNR if that property was not sold to them. So when I talk about Columbus being a real partner in this, it was to allow that sale to take place. And so in that picture totality, again, it took everyone to do something in order to get to the end, which was, again, major projects completed. I agree with your drainage assessment of ditch 15. As we all know, water has no boundaries. We all have to work together across cities in order to make ditch projects go. I understand that Columbus residents also were assessed in that project, so part ad valorem, part special assessment. So I understand that happens, and it happens in every ditch project. There was other ditch projects that Columbus was also assessed on, and I understand the benefit. And the use of the credits in order to make that project successful. The idea was time. We all wanted to have these projects done timely. Taking years to do projects, the public sometimes doesn't understand why government moves so slow, and sometimes government moves slow because, again, there's a lot of partnerships, a lot of permits, a lot of things have to happen. This MOU was relatively quick, and we were able to get projects done, which is why we went down that route and not a joint powers agreement, because that was the other route. As far as Thornbeck Farms, you are right. Without the wetland credits, that project would not have happened. And so we have always worked with all of our watershed districts in order to get projects done. I am not, I'm probably the proponent. I educate the public on wetland and the 3 different layers of wetland process we go through. Not every city administrator is going to know those levels of detail, but I am your advocate to the public in education in that matter. So nobody knows as I do that conduit on what it takes to do banking and projects and getting those done. I understand that you feel that there's that Columbus has made whole. And I think from our leadership, they feel that they've had a true loss. And I think that's really really the crux of the workshop, is to identify so you understand the loss. After the workshop, if you understand that you feel you've already compensated Columbus with all you've stated, I think then at least our leadership would say, you know what, we tried our best to show what we felt at the time would be a significant trade, and in loss. So I understand, I take all your comments, but I do feel that the workshop would be prudent on a one-on-one, because this is specific to Columbus, meaning the perceived agreement is specific to our request. I do acknowledge your project-based. It has to be project-based, and I understand that totally. And we haven't had a project yet to come in for you, which is why we haven't been before you, that we could actually use them. And so I do think that that process and procedure should be at least acknowledged in minutes, so in the future when a project comes in, we know what the criteria is. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr.
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, I'll offer perhaps a bit of summary and look for the board to take an action as quickly as I can. I think the board had very good discussion at its July 10th meeting. You considered all the information to date, and you developed a position, which resulted in the draft that you're contemplating this morning. You received a second letter this morning noting the opportunity to read it. I'll share with you that it was shared with Smith Partners. They were able to read it quickly and respond. They recognize it's certainly a polite letter. It reiterates details of the previous letters. There's nothing new specific to the issue at hand, I would say. Doesn't contradict anything that was presented to the board or how the board discussed it, I would say. And I did speak with Elizabeth Mersko, the administrator, the other morning. We had a good discussion as well. I appreciate the thought about process and procedure. And at that time I said, reiterated, we're at step 1. You know, a lot of things were discussed in the past, but we still haven't moved off that. Certainly recognize the comments by the managers this morning, and some of that detail politely and respectfully. It's much about what we've been discussing and trying to wrap our minds around. So the next step in the process, what's step 2? I think the City of Columbus is putting that forth, and the district has importantly crafted in the draft letter on page 27, and I look as Manager Bradley did to the last 2 blocks of text within it, where the district would in good faith, evaluate any requests considering the following criteria. The district lays out the criteria. I think it would be advantageous as the city develops a project to come with that criteria in mind and how it would address it with the board. I wouldn't say that that criteria is definitive because we don't know what the project is yet, and there's additional detail that may be important. And with,
Yeah.
yep,
I was just going to say, the magic words, consider at least the following, so you're
Yes.
correct.
thank you. I make
It was
note of the.
well-crafted.
Make note of the technical evaluation panel, which sequencing is what determines whether an impact can take place. I don't necessarily see a need for them to be at the table, but it's an entity that has a strong voice and appeal rights. So as the project's developed, they would be an important partner in understanding where they stand on the administration of the Wetland Conservation Act. And I would say that your statement within the letter is not a statement of acceptance or approval or those types of things, but rather to the city's request, it's a statement of process. Here's how we get to step 2. And so if the board wishes to have that meeting, I think we're looking for the city to come well prepared with those criteria being spoken to.
See, so before I make the motion, I just want to observe that we have 27, 28 cities, all of whom would probably like the opportunity to bring a project to us to use credits. We have an existing obligation, unfortunately, in my opinion, in Blaine, which could use up all the credits we have. We don't know yet. We may not know for some period of time. At the same time, the city is facing Jodell Street. I've heard the citizens up there loud and clearly. If fixing Jodell Street were to require the use of wetland credits, that might be something we would want to partner in. When you bring us a project, we will consider it in good faith. So with that, I will move that we approve.
Mr. President, may I speak before may I comment before we make the
Certainly,
motion?
normally we do that after you've the motion and then. we have
Okay,
debate.
that's
But
fine. Well, I would just like to say that I feel shorted. I think we should have had the president, our 15-year president, who negotiated all of this. Nobody's talked to her. She was in the room and knows all the stuff that isn't in this that was said and negotiated and talked about. And we have not talked to her. I have. Nobody else has. I know that because she told me. She hasn't heard from anybody. And she's the one who negotiated the whole thing. And I feel as though the board should have had a chance to at least listen to what the person that negotiated for the watershed has to say about the whole thing. We haven't done that. And that would have been so simple, it's almost negligent to have not talked to the person that did all the negotiating. We're putting all these motives to all this stuff that's in the MOU and all that. There was all kinds of things that happened besides that and talk. We heard none of it, and we could have.
What that argument ignores is number one.
Microphone.
Ignores that Pat's never been shy. Pat felt she had something she needed to share with us. She would have done that. But more importantly, by consensus, this board concluded that whatever was done in 2009 has become moot. That we have moved forward in 14 years. We have given 18 credits to the city. We are now faced with a city with a request no different than any other city, and it needs to get in line with all of our 27 cities and bring us a proposal that says it's better than any other proposal. And it has an opportunity to do that. So what Pat may or may not have promised in 2009 to me is irrelevant.
So
I will make a motion.
So what this president does from now on is irrelevant when you leave the board.
If you wait 14 years to act on it, you better believe it. So I move to authorize me to sign the letter of response contained in our packet on pages 26 and 27.
I would second that, Mr. Chair.
Mr. President, just a couple of remarks. As I said earlier, I thought this letter is too nice, and I'm going to tell you why now. This letter in the last two paragraphs that you were referencing almost sounds like this is exclusive with the city of Columbus and doesn't, in my opinion, explain the other cities' opportunities. And then finally, I guess I have one last thing to say about this situation. I apologize to you, Miss Elizabeth. I missed a number on my thing here. So if this is a cost factor for the city because of the cost of these things, maybe the city might consider talking to the district about the district changing the rules. That's another option besides a wetland bank and other things, zoning changes, special use permits. There are lots of different tools that are there. And so with that, Mr. President, I yield back the floor.
All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
No.
Opposed? No, it passes 3-1.
And I would like, Mr. President, I would like a change made. It says the board finds the events, and I would like it to say the consensus of the board, since it isn't the full board.
Well, it is the full board. That's how the board acts. The board acts, we voted.
We
3-1.
put consensus and everything else we wrote about it of the board.
We do that when we're working off the workshop where we don't take votes. So there you go, Mr. Administrator. I will be happy to sign that letter. Thank you.
Very good.
Next item.
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, next on your agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, before Elizabeth leaves, I'd just like to say, as someone who has spent a professional lifetime doing collaborative projects with multiple agencies, kudos to you for gathering this many organizations together in a short amount of time to actually make these projects happen. So my compliments to you and to the folks that actually attended this event. And I guess the unfortunate thing is they didn't hammer out and commit to writing what the final perceived agreement would be. So
Much appreciated. The hindsight is always 20/20 when you're doing this, and at the time you think you have all the details. We've all been there where we drafted something and looked back 2 weeks and you said, well, geez, why didn't I put that in there too? So again, we've all been there, but much appreciated. Thank you.
thank you.
President Bradley, Board of Managers, I'll note in my mind, we now have step 2 in place, which is laid out in the letter. Next item on the agenda under items requiring board action, City of Roseville, Ramsey County Ditch 4, Basic Water Management Project Reimbursement. It's on page 29 of your packet. This is the public drainage system project where the open ditch was converted to a pipe. As part of that agreement with the City of Roseville, the Water Management District collection was to go to Roseville up to a total amount of $450,000. These are collected over time by the county, and we received the most recent disbursement from the county. And those dollars we need to transfer over and distribute to Roseville. So with that,
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the RCD number 4 Water Management District reimbursement to the City of Roseville and direct staff to issue a payment in the amount of $45,040.94.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None.
Board of Managers, next on the agenda is the check register.
You wanted to add the district watershed Oh, I'm sorry, that was under items for discussion.
Correct.
Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, after having reviewed the 7/26/2023 check register and the 7/31 interim financial statements, both prepared by Redpath and Company, as well as the 7/20 PMA investment statement register, I move approval of the 7/26/2023 check register in the amount of $204,000, $204,018.82.
Along with the July interim financial statements.
Yeah, I guess we rewrote this so that
Oh, did you?
um,
All right.
Louis helped with this,
There you go.
right, so that'll
Well,
work.
a second, if please.
Okay.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Any opposed? None. All in favor, it passed 4-0.
thank you.
Board of Managers, next on the agenda for your consideration are the items for discussion and informational purposes. This is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Resiliency Grant presentation. We have Kendra from our office and Brett from Houston Engineering. They were very important folks in the following through on the grant project, and they would like to show you how it went.
Mr. Chair, I missed who is here with, hi.
Rex Zimmerman with Houston Engineering.
Okay, did you do all those fabulous maps?
Yes, well, yes, I guess.
Yes, good.
RCIS staff did.
He's not on this here, so you have questions of him, get him to talk.
Oh, that way, okay, thank you.
Okay, I think I'm ready. Great, good morning, President Bradley and Board of Managers. Kendra Summerfeld, Outreach and Communications Coordinator for Rice Creek Watershed District. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the climate change and floodplain resiliency project that we did. It was just a quick overview of what the project was. It was a grant from the MPCA, and our biggest concerns to look at was regional flood risk due to climate change, but other aspects of climate change was definitely included, as you see in the Freshwaters report and Houston's report. So one of the biggest things that Rice Creek Watershed District did was the community resilience building workshops. The goal here was to create sustainable momentum around community resilience planning to spur collaboration and action over time. So we brought about 55 community members together. We also had a core team of various cities and organizations, including myself, and Nick was also included in some of the core team meetings. And Freshwater led all of those meetings and also the workshops. They facilitated the 2 workshops for us. And in those workshops, we identified the top hazards in the watershed. We identified vulnerabilities and strengths, and then we prioritized community actions. And all of those items that we discussed and worked in the workshops are in Freshwater's report that they compiled for us. And so that's the Community Resilience Action Plan. And here are just a few pictures from the workshops. I am in the top one, actually, leading a table discussion for looking at all these maps and identifying those hazards and those vulnerabilities and strengths that we have across the watershed district. And yes, Houston did provide all of those amazing maps for us, a bunch of data probably 20 maps, I want to say. So it's a lot of good information to look at. And then some of the results of these workshops, we have increased community awareness of climate-related issues in the Watershed District. And then we also have actions to solve these issues, and those are all listed in that report that Freshwater put together. We also have an increased knowledge of environmental justice areas of concern. So that was one of the maps that Houston put together for us. Comes in real handy to look at areas that are underserved and might be very vulnerable to heat and flooding and those kind of hazards. And it's also, the biggest thing about this report and this project is it's a future tool for project implementation. So we really want to use this in the future for looking at projects and looking at those actions that we can do in the Watershed District. And then also it's a tool to incorporate into other city and counties climate change planning. There's a few, such as Ramsey County is doing a very similar climate action planning right now. They're doing, I actually attended a workshop, and so they're doing very similar things to what we just did. So that's really exciting to see. And I know the city of Hugo is also very interested in seeing these plans and then talking to us in the future about projects. And so it gives us a really great tool to be of support and collaborate with our city and county partners in regards to this very complex climate change issue. And that's all I have for you. Unless you have any questions about the workshops, we do have Brett giving another presentation about the implementation and the report that they did.
Are there any questions?
So you said Brett will do a report on the outcomes? That's,
Yep, the report
Well,
that they did and the like flood model and
Okay.
all of that.
okay, I'll hold my questions until later.
Perfect.
Yes,
Mr. Administrator?
Board of Managers, yep, we'll have Brett go ahead and give his presentation. So the work is twofold, if you will. There's a technical side. Brett and Houston Engineering worked for us regarding the changes that climate change and those impacts to the district, where they'll be and that sort of thing. I'm sure Brett will get into the detail. Certainly they provided the map and then the engagement as Kendra just went through of the public, to engage them, to know their thoughts on it, because these are many things that the district in and of itself is unable to accomplish on its own.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, Board of Managers. Brett Zimmerman with Houston Engineering. Been with Houston for about 12 years. Actually working with the district-wide model for Rice Creek since 2015. So pretty familiar with the modeling and the system. As Kendra mentioned, this was funded through the MPCA. Through that grant process, that environmental justice areas was a key component for the ranking on if grants were awarded or not. So there are a few areas within the district that meet those requirements for, not requirements, meet those limits for, I think it's people of color and then English-speaking language. So there's MPCA has a nice online map that you can look at if you want to know more about that. The grant was funded, it was about a $100,000 study. I was going to pull these numbers up, but I couldn't get on here this morning, but it was about 100,000, and I think the grant was 10% local, 90% MPCA. Those numbers aren't perfect, but just kind of roughly. So a lot of state dollars went into this study, not as much local dollars. So, okay, good. A lot of words on here, but just kind of the three main purposes for what the grant was for was to look at the district-wide model and see what happens with future climate hydrology. So how bad is it going to get? Where is it going to get worse than other places? That's the second bullet. Identifying the vulnerable locations within the communities. And then the third point on this was to look at capital improvement projects to figure out what can we do to help offset those potential impacts related to future hydrology. The tool we used for this was the district-wide model. Just some background on that. You guys completed in 2011. It's actually a combination of multiple different models. The focus is really on the public drainage system, so we don't have the level of city storm sewer and things like that. It's more public drainage system based. In general, we would run the 2-year through 100-year events. This study really focused on that 100-year event or the high intensity rainfalls. This was not a climate hydrology.
Bring it up.
How do you do that again?
Hard time hearing you. There you go.
Ah,
All right, better? That's good.
Thank you.
So it wasn't a climatology study. We could have spent the whole $100,000 looking at future conditions, rainfall, and what that might look like. What we did was look at the available resources that are out there from a federal level up through, there's actually even a University of Minnesota study that we looked at. So we looked at these 4 different sources and tried to figure out, do they all have kind of a common theme? When you start digging into these sources, you get a lot of buzzwords like what is going to be hot and dry or warm and wet or stormy, not as stormy, things like that. Throughout those 4 different sources, we kind of all honed in on there's about a 19% increase in rainfall depth due to climate change hydrology. So the 100-year event is 7.2 inches. 19% increase is about another 1.4 inches for that event, so 8.6 roughly. What that relates to on the landscape then, so we took that hydrology, ran the 100-year event in the model. What's shown on the map is the blue is the existing 100-year floodplain, so that's what would be updated annually based on the district-wide model. It's really hard to tell at this scale when you're looking at the whole watershed, but there is red underneath that. That red would be flooding due to climate change hydrology. And there's a few more figures that are zoomed in closer that we'll look at. But a 19% increase across the watershed, so additional 1.4 inches of runoff equates to about almost 14,000 acre-feet of volume. So keep that number in mind when we start looking at projects, because some of the projects we identified have maybe a couple hundred acre-feet of storage. So when you're looking at almost 14,000 acre-feet of additional volume, to store all of that water isn't really attainable. One of the other outputs we looked at was looking at the lake levels for all the lakes within the watershed district, or at least the lakes that we have mapped floodplain for. Some of them, the increase was pretty minimal. So like Turtle Lake had about just under a 1/10 of increase in 100-year water level. One of the key outputs here was we found that Long Lake actually has about 1.3 feet of increase due to the climate change hydrology. So when you're looking at a lake that already has known flooding impacts around it, additional 1.3 feet will put a lot of more structures at risk. Here's kind of that floodplain zoomed in around Long Lake. It doesn't look like a ton for that red area, but that's just because of the landscape. It doesn't spread out as much, but it is over a foot higher, or it would be based on the hydrology that we ran. Here, this is just another example. So this is 5362. Here the topography is a lot flatter, so that additional flooding actually shows up with a much larger footprint as opposed to, say, around Long Lake where it was more contained. So where flooding impacts throughout the district are seen, it varies because of what that existing topography is. If you've got tight channel slopes, an increase of that 19% hydrology might bounce up a little bit, but not have much for a floodplain increase. And then some areas like this where it's flatter topography, the floodplain gets quite a bit wider. So that gave us kind of that first and second step of how bad is it going to get based on the hydrology we ran. And then this is kind of the last step of what do we do about it. So this approach is really being proactive by the district instead of reactive, instead of having hydrology continue to change and having flooding impacts and having residents come in and say, my residence is flooded now and it wasn't before. And then you're trying to reactively go look at projects to offset that. This approach is trying to identify where those hot spots are, where it might be worse in the future, and then try to implement projects before certain areas are developed. So really being proactive instead of reactive. We looked at storage projects only and on a regional scale, so larger scale storage projects. And then we looked at areas that wouldn't change the general function of the land. By that, I mean, if there's areas that are already flooding, basically, can we store water and flood them a little bit more? So the screening process we went through for this was to look at the public parcels within the watershed district. Having a public partner on a project would be a lot quicker to implement potentially than having to purchase private landowner properties. And we looked at intersecting those public parcels with the NWI layer, so National Wetland Inventory. So that gives us kind of areas that are already currently flooded or have seasonal water on them. And then we looked at this crop productivity index layer. So that's, I can't remember, it might be USDA that puts that out. I don't remember the source for sure, but it ranks basically everywhere on the landscape from 0 to 100 of how productive that land is for crop. So
Crop.
so low numbers would be poor agriculture layer or areas. So we intersected those because those are already not having productive cropland. That gave this kind of map that's got a bunch of different colors on it. So these were areas we started to look at for potential capital improvement projects. So this was our initial screening process to say, we can't look at everywhere in the watershed district just by zooming around on a map trying to find areas. How do we screen down to specific locations to actually look at for projects? From there, we identified it was like 29 different potential project locations. So shown in different colors on here, either blue or orange. We identified those 29 locations, and then we started to look at each individual one and determine if it actually made sense for a potential storage project. So reasons why, say, it was listed as secondary instead of primary would be if it's too far up in the watershed, there's not enough runoff volume that could get to the location, so storing water doesn't do anything. Conversely to that, if it's too far downstream in the watershed, there might not be enough storage volume there to make a meaningful offset for what's coming from upstream. Other reasons why they were listed as secondary could have been already having small outlet structures. So if it's a wetland area that's got a small pipe on it, there's nothing really we can do to shrink that down and store more water. So those 29 locations got narrowed down to 7 potential sites. From there, we actually put them into the model, into the district-wide model, and put together these concept design, this is just an example of one of the concept designs, but we put them into the model, simulated the future conditions hydrology, and figured out, how does that project and storage volume help benefit impacts that are downstream. And there's a table on the next slide that will go through those results, but this is just an example of one of them. This was Site 3, so this is South Hanson Park, I believe. This location, there's actually a number of projects that the district is currently looking at potential projects that made it through our screening tool. So that kind of validated the screening tool that we used. This was one of them. These all 7 concept design sheets are in the final report, so if you want to look at those individually. But after we ran the model, can everybody see that table?
We got our work done.
So the kind of middle column is what the current 100-year flood level is at some various points downstream of these different projects. So this was kind of our reporting location to figure out how well is the storage project actually offsetting peak flood levels downstream. So if we look at kind of this, I don't know if my mouse will show up. Yeah. So where my mouse is there, kind of under that 2 and 3, this is, just to go through one example here, but this is at Hanson Park, so downstream of 2 of the sites. Right now, water levels, it's at 881, so don't worry too much about the elevation exactly, but if we don't do anything and hydrology changes continue, the model shows that the water level there is actually going to be 8/10 higher than it is today, so just under a foot higher. If, in this case, sites 2 and 3 were implemented, then those water levels would actually be 1.26 below where they are today. So basically, we'd end up about 4/10 lower with those implemented as opposed to being 8/10 higher, if that makes sense. too many numbers. So
Because
basically,
storage happens someplace
water
else.
levels are here
Yeah.
and nothing happens, water levels are going to be 8/10 higher. If those sites are implemented now, water levels with current hydrology are here, those peak levels would drop over a foot, and as future conditions, future climate change occurs and we get more intense rainfalls, that would actually still be lower than the current flood level. So it would offset the impacts from that climate change hydrology. We can talk about specific sites if you got questions on them, but
Yeah.
just kind of go through, these were results that were in the report. One other key thing we found here is that some of the projects actually didn't have an impact to the peak levels. So that was a good outcome too. Well, it's good to know. I don't know if it's a good outcome, but it's good to know that implementing that project actually isn't going to have an effect on peak levels downstream. And a lot of that just because of how the timing occurs and different things with a flood event, it has a benefit, but it doesn't have a benefit on the peak. So that was good to know because it put kind of 3 or 4 of these projects into maybe a much lower priority. So the outcomes, locations that we found with the greatest risk were JD2, Middle Rice Creek, and Long Lake. If you recall, there was a future conditions study that was done 4 or 5 years ago that looked at land use changes more, but these same areas also were noted in that study. So kind of consistent with the land use change and hydrology change, seems like those areas are kind of a concern, or they should be a concern into the future.
Forgive me, Mr. President. Sir, you say JD2, is that Ramsey or Washington? On your screen here, hydrology, JD2.
Yeah.
Which one are we talking about?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Manager Waller, that would be Washington JD2.
Okay, thank you. That's, I just wanted to have my directions correct. Was I going up or down on the?
Yep. So the other outcome, sites 2, 3, and 7 provided the greatest opportunity to reducing those impacts of climate change. Just jump forward quick here, but for reference, so sites 2 and 3 are both down in RCD 235, down in New Brighton. So South Hanson Park is one of those, and then Jones Lake is one of those. Those were 2 of the 3 that had the greatest opportunity to reduce the impacts of climate change. And then that site 7 is up on the top right. So that'd be the JD2 system. So that's in Forest Lake. The polygons on this map don't represent flood elevations or anything. It's just a polygon of saying this is the location approximately. Oops. Jumped ahead to the finale on accident. Sorry. So the last bullet on here. So the other big takeaway from this is this grant program that the MPCA put out. Rice Creek was one of 10 or 11 to actually apply for and be awarded the first round of that grant. And that was back 2 years ago, I believe. So they've had more rounds of the planning grants, but this year through the legislative session, don't worry about reading all this, but the main part here is that through the session this year, MPCA was awarded $50 million for this year and $50 million for next year, focused on climate resiliency. So this would have, you've got this climate resiliency plan and potential implementable projects. There will be, we believe there will be a grant application this fall that comes out that'll have about $35 million for implementation. And having the climate report, you're one of 10 or 11 reports that are out there. Having this to lean back on with that grant application, if you were to pursue that, would put you ahead of others that don't have this climate resiliency plan in place or the planning project completed.
So what do these conclusions, how do they impact our current plans for the Roseville 235 projects?
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, it presents greater opportunities for the district to be successful in having the funding necessary to accomplish what you looked at historically, RCD 235. The state, as Brett shared, in its newer, current grant applications and such, is asking, directing that the money they give out have these considerations of environmental justice and such, as well as climate change, a major issue on the landscape. So it is the work we had completed, RCD 235. This work is akin to that, but says, hey, what happens in climate change? Not surprisingly, the areas that had problems previously are greater. So what are our opportunities? Brett identified where those, I'll say, increased, elevated hotspots are, confirmed some of those areas that we've already been considering. And in dealing with this at a watershed level, it's all about storage and conveyance. So where's our conveyance restricting and causing flooding? That might be relieved by culvert size, but we can't just send the water downstream because we place the burden on another, and that's where we need the storage to mitigate and have the system, the plumbing, work efficiently to get us through these highs and lows. It's modeling, so where it rains and how much and all that, we're 185 square miles, so rain in Blaine may not have impact in another area, but the model is our best effort to understand how these will play out in the future.
Yeah, so I still want to understand.
Yeah.
If we pursue this money, and my assumption is we want to pursue this money hard,
Yes.
we don't want to have two stories at once or conflicting stories at once, going to legislature looking for bonding. If we're looking for grant money here that replaces the need for the bonding money, help me. Is that something we need to study?
Board of Managers, I would say not so much more study, but I think aggregating our position, clarifying or identifying what we had previously presented, the impacts from a climate change perspective as well, and then to say somehow this work must get done. Here's our opportunities, and it could be being quite frank with our elected officials and asking for the bonding, noting to them we're trying all avenues available to us. Please help us. I think
You're not going to get bonding if you're asking for a grant.
well,
That's reality.
Well, you might not get the grant, and you might not get the bonding, so you have to.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to.
Yeah.
And they sound like they are the same projects, but different projects. I mean.
Additional projects, I would say. So RCD 235, certainly we've got a suite of projects there that we're looking to implement. Jones Lake is one that was referenced within this material. That plan isn't substantially changed, and we're working to have it shovel ready. The site up on JD2 and the Hugo area is a location that could be storage. I don't think we've had as much attention on that to date. So here's another area. So maybe, multiple grant applications, those sorts of things. So we should be working with Houston Engineering to aggregate, and I think Chris wanted to add a bit there.
No, Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Manager Bradley, Board of Managers. I think it's been a fairly successful strategy for watershed districts to go after multiple funding sources. For one, Buffalo Red River Watershed District, they've had a number of projects where they've utilized like 3 or 4 different sources of funding, including internal sources, but multiple external sources, the LCCMR funding, Clean Water Fund grants, and that, and aggregating them together. I don't know that the going after a grant will affect our bonding natively. And again, I'm not a lobbyist, so I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But I do know that, for instance, the Upper Minnesota River Watershed District, they recently gotten bonding for one of their projects, Tolly Cooley, which they'd also pursued grant funding for recently. So certainly a lot of strategy there to discuss further, but I think that this does nothing but open up doors for these projects to be funded. And certainly they're multi-purpose projects. They provide multiple benefits. As Nick alluded to, they provide a benefit in the current hydrology. They provide a benefit for future hydrology. They also provide benefit for water quality. And more to that discussion, I think, as far as how we position ourselves.
Thank you. John?
Mr. President, this is a question for either engineer. So I see we're going to do a lot of this down Ramsey County and heavily in the area where it's urbanized. And I expect that's where we need it also, no question about that. Have you considered that when this water storage is there, how that would integrate with the reuse programs that we've been sponsoring or other programs in addition? There's this quantity of water there and you've captured it. And is that, one of the uses for it to, not just for, storage for it to hold it up and to let it go? I respectfully disagree with my administrator. Water has to go downhill or up in the air, or in the ground. It has to go someplace. It can't just sit around.
Yeah.
So have you, and if you haven't, will you?
Yeah, thanks, Manager Wall. So for this grant, the MPCA wanted to see concept designs as part of the outcome. They didn't want just another study that's on a table. And some of the discussion here is focused on kind of the RCD 235 area. There are other areas in the watershed that projects could be implemented. So I think for the grant application, not that you're submitting one right now, but for what comes out for a potential grant, having this study, I think you can target other areas within the watershed too and say that we've looked at the climate change hydrology. We know this is also a hot spot. It wasn't identified in that study as a concept design, but we know there's an issue there. So I think we don't want to just target those ones that are in here as concept designs, but keep this climate change report in your mind for any project throughout the watershed. To that level too, since it was kind of this concept level design for the projects, we didn't get into what are the water quality benefits for the storage, potential reuse or anything like that. That would all come through kind of final design and everything. It was more so, here's a pocket on the landscape that has some potential storage volume in it. We know there's problems downstream. If we hold water there, how does that affect downstream?
Mr. President, then a follow-up question. Okay, you've identified these areas. Have you made any contact with the cities that are involved in here? Because that has a big issue with them. For example, what those secondary project purposes, that was a good word for Chris, or yours, both of you. Purposes like, for example, reuse or just water storage or such. Have you gotten to the point where you've decided to talk to the cities yet? Now, the study's done. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to use the study as a basis for application for receiving money. That's good. I just want to know how far have you gone to the step where you talk to the cities about it yet?
I don't believe, or you want to take that?
Manager Waller, Board of Managers, I'd say that all the municipalities were engaged early on for their participation in the study and to come to the table, those workshops and that sort of thing. We have not specifically brought the report forward and such. This is our, I call the victory lap, to share with the board and the public what we've undertaken, and then we would make it available.
Sounds like a subject at the partners meeting, eh? But you have these sites selected particularly.
Yes, not to steal Brett and Kendra's thunder, but the project was accepted by the abstract for this project was considered and accepted by Minnesota Waters Conference, so they'll be doing a presentation there to present the information as well. So.
Well, congratulations to you.
Could,
Go ahead.
yes, President Bradley, I'd asked to put Chris and Brett in the hot seat here. I'm wondering if
You go step.
with the volume of water that we're talking about here and to manager's question about stormwater reuse, is it conceptually even significant, the amount of water you would have to irrigate to reduce, I think you said, 14,000 acre feet or whatever. Certainly every little bit helps. Obviously, it reduces groundwater pumping and that, but is there any kind of feel you can give us from an engineering side about how much irrigation that actually is?
Yeah, to answer Nick's question, I think we're talking a couple of different scales here. The reuse projects, really in my mind, are intended to, get at, getting the volume from smaller storms infiltrated down. They certainly provide some incremental benefit for the larger storms as well, but, certainly that is all part of the equation. The large, 100-year event storms are just one aspect of, the water cycle that can potentially harm individuals. People can be harmed or have problems with smaller events as well. Our focus on this one was those much larger events and what, regional projects could be done to solve that. But I think that every little bit helps across the district. That's why you have the district rules. And which reminds me that one other thing I was going to mention is that one thing the district has already done through its rules that really speaks volumes when you look at that table that Brett showed, showing the difference in water elevations on all the lakes, is that the district has taken a proactive step of requiring an additional foot of freeboard, so 2 feet of freeboard for homes that are placed or projects that are set up for homes that are placed along the floodplains. And many other locations, they're only going by the minimum standard of 1 foot. So that extra foot in there provides a lot of added insurance for these larger events that we're seeing. And I think that these conclusions we found kind of speak to the benefits of the district's proactive decision years ago to do that.
Marcy?
Thank you. So the first comment would be about the 50 people that participated in the roundtable. 2 meetings. I attended a portion of one of them, very interactive. So we have at least 50 individuals who represent communities and, elected officials that have engaged already. So I think that's 50 advocates to have something happen. I also would just compliment the Watershed, because Watershed investment in the work that was done prior to this allowed us to have the information needed to apply for the grant to get in there for the first 11. So when you talk about 10% of the district, even for this project, 10% of the money coming from the district and 90% coming from the state, I recognize the forethought that went into a lot of this work. I'd like to see if you have the map there, or at a later date, how the environmental justice map overlays with the projects that you said, the 7 and the 11, how that works. And then, of course, I have to bring up, is cleaning out the current stormwater retention ponds, can that be, or is that part of the scope? And I would just add here that Mounds View has just completed their evaluation of those stormwater ponds and has some priorities of what's going to get cleaned out first. So existing opportunities to store more water if you do some maintenance on those ponds.
President Bradley, if I could, Chris, I think it's important that maybe you give a very brief and simple explanation of what a stormwater pond does. I'm thinking about water quality and that sort of thing versus the flooding event and how those interact and how the outlet comes into play for its value for
Well,
the
yeah.
two different arenas.
And I know we've had discussion before, but
Yeah.
just keeping that on, in front of us.
Y- Thank you, Manager Wynant, President Bradley, Board of Managers. What I'm getting at is the cleaning or the maintenance of a stormwater pond doesn't necessarily improve or create a reduction in flood elevation. Is that generally correct, Chris?
Yeah, it would restore volume for water quality treatment, but wouldn't likely restore volume for flood management.
Okay.
Because it's all area that would be typically underwater anyway. That said, there are projects that can be done on the maintenance side that potentially could expand a pond or improve upon a pond if they get at those kind of activities at the same time.
And President Bradley, I would just share that, so that's what Hanson Park was. We cleaned out the water quality side of it. We adjusted the outlet, more storage on the landscape, improved conditions for flood elevations as well.
So,
Okay.
Manager Wynant's other question involved the environmental justice criteria. I too am ignorant about environmental justice criteria. Can you provide some insight?
Yeah, so the report here, I was looking to see if we had a map that showed it. If not, they were in the community engagement maps, right?
President Bradley, Board of Managers, perhaps it's simplest if Houston could send over the environmental justice map, so it's a defined area. It'd be good to know specifically what the criteria was for the GIS layer and the blobs that you'll see. We can email it out to everyone.
I'm assuming that we fell inside the boundary.
Well, definitely.
They are unique
It's based
blobs.
on census tracts.
Yeah,
So
census
in that
data.
census tract is I think it's people of color and English speaking, I think.
Yeah.
So it's based on that census tract. So it's not necessarily city boundaries always. It kind of varies. And it was kind of spotty throughout the watershed. It's not, the whole watershed wasn't in it, the whole watershed wasn't out. It was kind of various tracts throughout. But we have the maps that we can provide.
Go ahead, Chris.
To add to that, one of those areas was identified as environmental justice areas, that area on the north or the downstream end of RCD2, where we showed the photos that you've seen over and over again of all the cars being flooded in the parking lots and that. And so, that would be an area that would be directly affected and improved upon by the projects that we're envisioning. And in my mind, that would help also with the scoring for potential future grant opportunities coming out of that.
Yeah, it was still up, I guess. In the House bill language, it said that at least 40% of the money granted for this $50 million has to go towards projects that meet the environmental justice criteria.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. Kendra.
I wanted to add a point on to Manager Waller's comment about the communicating with the cities and getting them this report. We had a core team for this project for the workshops and with freshwater, and a list of those participants is in the report on the last page, I think. And we can call on them to bring this report to their cities and to their communities. A lot of them were professional staff at these cities and different organizations. So we do have that resource as well as the workshop participants. And then I also want to add for Manager Weinman, we had 2 CAC members show up to the workshops. So that was really great to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Further?
President Bradley, I'd ask Brett, maybe you have another slide, or were we at the end? No?
No, that was all. The one thing I'll throw out with that grant, we don't know what match criteria will be. We don't know eligibility. We don't know what it's going to look like. It'll be the first round it's ever out. So think there's about 35 million available for the program, but we'll have to kind of wait and see when it hits the streets what actually, what qualifies, what's eligible, are things like final design eligible, that sort of thing. So that part's kind of up in the air.
Board of Managers, so with that, I would intend, with the board's consensus, to engage Houston on aggregating the information. I know we've a task order to open on Jones Lake and the related RCD 235, and working with Kendra to get our messaging as positive as possible, that we're checking boxes on criteria, environmental justice, et cetera. So maybe a future task order, maybe it's a smaller operation that the administrator couldn't gauge in anyways.
Marcy?
Kendra, your report was included in one of our packets, as I recall. Haven't I seen your?
It's in in our report, the one that Houston put together, it's in an appendix in that report. It is a standalone report as well, but we included it as an appendix in our overall report. That way, when it was submitted to the MPCA, it had everything in one.
Okay, yeah, I know, I recall seeing it somewhere, and the citizens, the work group came up with some excellent support statements for what we're doing, so.
Yep, I included it at the last CAC meeting, just so they
That's
could
where I
review
saw
it and
That's right, okay,
see it.
thank you.
Okay, anything further? Obviously, please pursue.
Yes.
And to the extent you need a work order to accomplish that with Houston Engineering, please pursue. From my standpoint, I'm sure everyone else's too.
Excellent.
Okay, anything else?
President Bradley,
Yeah.
next on the agenda?
Yep.
Thank you. Next on the agenda was the district watershed resolution efforts. The previous board had a good discussion, several managers commenting, and staff would like a little bit of clarity, make sure we're aligning with the board. So if you'll entertain, I'll review what I took away from the meeting and based on our subsequent investigation, where we're at, and then we'll look at fine tuning from there. Kendra, as you know, works to make these communications clear to our other parties. So, Manager Bradley, at the last meeting, you were making reference to the open meeting law resolution, and we were kind of surprised to see the 3-year term limit in that document. I sent out a previous email, checked into that. It is what indeed it is in place, and it's what we want, so good to see.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
We won.
We won.
By default or somewhere.
Manager Wagaman, you raised reference when Manager Waller was speaking about the past DNR drainage resolution, and during that item, that to me is the sunsetting resolution that we raised that spoke about the district's interaction with DNR, et cetera, that we're believing would be best for the district to put forward. And then we'll circle back to that in a minute. Manager Wynant, you raised Metro Watershed's bonding effort in that situation, trying to get monies for our projects. I understood that to fall away, for lack of a better word, but to proceed Rice Creek under independent efforts and engage with elected folks and our partners as needed. So we would go to the elected folks ourselves. If the county can help us in that regard, et cetera, we would do just that. So Manager Waller, you raised, recognized 103D.621. I did look at that, and that was Metro Watershed's authority to improve drainage, and couple that with the needs of Wetland Conservation Act, potential drainage exemption or expansion to facilitate such an effort. Checked in with our council, and the statute's been about for quite some time. And it's akin to what we've understood. It's nothing new, if you will, that the district could entertain improvement of a system. Bear with me. And it's, how would that be applicable to Rice Creek? And I did have a conversation with Chris, looking to see where Rice Creek may encounter this need, where we would be looking to improve the system, the public drainage system, based on the volume demands from runout from the cities. That would be a hotspot, if you will. At this time, there's no definitive location where we would have that. Our repairs of the system give us a functionality. I'm not saying it won't be compromised in the future, but our data to date doesn't indicate an issue. Am I getting that right, Chris? Maybe it's good for you to confirm that.
Yeah, what I would say is that we haven't to date encountered a scenario where we're envisioning an alternative to improve a drainage system and thereby would need some change in WACA to enable that to be accomplished.
And President Bradley, if I could expand on that then, what I took away from the discussion, Chris, was the district's public drainage systems in a repaired condition have the necessary drop in elevation, if you will, for the conveyance of water. As additional volume runs off the landscape, as development increases, we may need additional volume. So not digging the ditch deeper, but making it wider to accommodate that volume. And in an elementary sense, additional volume in the wetland, additional volume out of the wetland would not be a drain. So just kind of reiterating that at this point, it's not really apparent to us that we would have this problem, at least not yet. And so with that, I want to be careful of the district's ability to demonstrate a problem at which you would go to MOD and say, fix this, if I can't define the problem well, that it's obstructing the good work the district does for the citizens. If we can't demonstrate that, I feel it may fall flat. So that's some of the discussion I wanted to have about that and hear your response about which ones we might bring forward.
Go ahead, John.
So I just listened to a wonderful presentation about the need for more stormwater storage here. And some pretty good chunks of piece of property from what I've seen are going to be used. That tells me that you need to have a wider, possibly a bigger ditch system, improved ditch system. And I think that may become the basis for it. Now, I realize this study is just beginning, that Protestant program, but that becomes the basis for it. I want to thank Mr. Holtman for having a chat with me after the meeting last time. And you're correct, it's 6:21. I had to call him up the next Monday and tell him I'd made a mistake on it. It was 6:21. I opened my book at home, which I haven't looked at it 25 years, and read the notes my brother and I had in there at the time. And I've come to the conclusion that, the Wetland Conservation Act we are the only state in the United States with such a law. That tells you something. That tells me that's an extreme viewpoint, not a consensus, not a centrist point of view. And it's a difficulty right now. For example, we maintain JD2 not at the size that it was built for, or at the profile that we maintain it with a lack of 3 or 4 feet of muck in the bottom of it, just for one ditch to put on. We don't have the capacity there. because we're talking about wetland issues. So I think there's a problem there, and I respected what you're saying is you have to have a basis for demonstration to ask for a change. I don't disagree with you. I think the basis for that is this rainfall study you're talking about, and it probably hasn't developed enough yet to to the point of the work. It's just going to take some more work, but. I haven't changed my mind. I think the Wetland Conservation Act is right up there with prohibition for being repealed. Now, prohibition got repealed, so number 2 is up now, because I just, it's such a costly issue here, and some rule changes be made, and that I don't know. So if I was going to have a resolution, just to start the discussion, I'd make a resolution to repeal the Wetland Conservation Act. Now, I realize that would start a lot of screaming and yelling and all hair pulling out of there and such. But I think it's time after 30 years that law be reviewed. There's you're having a lot of experience with it, and that maybe it needs to be a more centrist point of view. Thank you for your help there.
Mr. Administrator.
Yes, Manager Bradley. Thank you, Manager Waller. I appreciate the acknowledgement of having a well laid out resolution to go forward. I think it's important to note, and Chris, you commented, and I'll bring it up here, so kudos to you. Wetland Conservation Act is one thing, and it does include some drainage exception, but we're also under federal regulation, and
which applies in all 50 states.
Correct.
And it does provide some exemption as well for maintenance of public drainage system. But as soon as we switch over to that improvement, we have the crux to the problem again.
You just told me we aren't improving it because we're leaving the status quo in the wetland.
And that may be a way to approach the issue to, as I said, volume in, volume out, no net loss, if you will, and potentially we could demonstrate that there is no loss to the wetland. That would be the best
So
scenario.
is Manager Waller suggesting we start all over again in terms of repairing our ditches?
Well, Mr. President,
I'm not sure I have an appetite for that.
I think the drainage system, the stormwater conveyance system, is something that is evolutionary, that it constantly is going to need a change to it. I mean, it was created and such. And so I don't think it'll ever be done there. As far as the Wetland Conservation Act and the Federal Act, Clean Water Act, the Wetland Conservation Act is far more restrictive than the Federal Clean Water Act. And that's what makes it extreme and more difficult to work with. But this is Minnesota, and we have a long cultural history of extremism in some particular areas. So,
President Bradley, to bring this to summary, I'll offer my opinion, which obviously you've heard, is that particular to 103D as it relates to WACA, I would suggest a hold until we can substantiate, perhaps at some time in the future to look for Metro Mod or Mod in general to champion the effort as well. I do think the Rice Creek has certainly some good intentions in regards to how we go about our public drainage work, as Manager Wagaman noted and Manager Waller as well. Our past efforts to have clear understanding of the interaction between drainage law and DNR's authorities. That's the one that is sunsetting. I know Chris had looked at that document, and Kendra has reached out to Metro Mod, and I would ask that we hear from Kendra on the effort to see what other watersheds may be interested in that, and then maybe Chris, specific to state of the condition there and the value in resubmitting that.
Mr. President, so just to give you an idea, 621 has some subdivisions in it, and one of them in my book that I had 25 years ago underlined in yellow was subdivision 5, which gives you some exemptions, you know. And one of those was an action that wasn't intended to create a wetland, was an exemption. So in our discussion with working with JD2 and with Mr. Jaski at the time, my brother said in a meeting over in the Blaine City Hall, a board not taking action is an action, which Mr. Jaski was upset with. He said, that's an inaction. This only says action. But my brother said, this board asked for authority to clean drainage ditches and then didn't do it. And that's a conscious action not to do something. And therefore, we should have an exemption and have our drainage restored. That's one of the problems with that Wetland Act. You wouldn't have that issue with the 401 Clean Water Act. But anyways, I'll leave it be at that.
Let me ask a process question. We've made a pretty big fight to always include the drainage work group in issues. Is this an item that if we want to go forward with, we would want to take there before we take it to MAUD to take action?
Oh, yeah, that'll die there.
President Bradley, Board of Managers, that's a very good question, one that came up in Minnesota Watershed's response to our efforts to rally this issue to the forefront. And my response to them was, historically, it hasn't been done, and I don't know that drainage work group and the MAUD resolution process are well paired or aligned for that to occur. Certainly, that's something that Minnesota Watersheds could bring forward and say, hey, this is now on our list and it's a priority issue. And so we want to get it on the table with drainage work group and make sure that we're ahead of the curve should legislation similar to the past be promoted.
Is there any discussion with regard to the presentation Nick has made about changing anything that he's proposed? In other words, you propose, we're satisfied with regard to the open meeting law, so we can keep our powder dry, that we not take action at this time on trying to amend state law with regard to exemptions from WACA for drainage, changing drainage to make it larger, I think, whatever.
Nick doesn't want to repeal the wetland conservation.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Taking bites you can actually chew is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I don't have any objection to leaving it be at the moment.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Any further discussion on this, Lisa? So you have our agreement with what you wanted to do. Does that work?
Manager Bradley, thank you. Not to extend this unnecessarily, but Kendra, we did have one watershed that asked us to, or had an interest in participation. I'll turn it over to you on that, if you would.
Yeah, so I reached out to Jan Voigt from Minnesota Watersheds now. And I just asked if there was any other watershed districts that was interested in that sunsetting resolution regarding the drainage issue. And was it Wild Rice Watershed District reached out, and they were curious on what we were wanting to do and if they were interested in partnering or supporting our resolution, what would we want from them? And I said I would wait for this discussion. So.
Yes, Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, Kendra smartly identified, you'll remember a number of watersheds put forth the same thing, and we got after the fact, after your approval, it's like, okay, administrators figure this out so we're all in unison, because we don't want at the time of the Minnesota Watershed's consideration of the resolutions to have this unalignment in those issues. So Kendra said, well, let's move it to the front end, have the discussion, make sure at least two of us are on the same page about our inputs to that. And then from there, bring the resolution to you. Hopefully, both boards would approve it or support it when we get to the meeting itself at Minnesota Watersheds. So we're happy to work with them at the staff level, amend what historically is going to sunset, freshen it to the current status of matters, have the other watershed be on the same page. At this point, I don't know that process allows for both our names on the same one or how that works, but we could work through that.
I can confess that I got lost.
Oh,
So
sorry.
which one was going to sunset that we reached out to ask, are you going to?
What are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
The mod resolution that is going to sunset is the one on DNR interaction with public drainage system. There was some past legislation that was moving forward that would clarify that. And then the foot got taken off the gas and that kind of fell away. Time has passed. It's going to sunset. The issue isn't resolved. We have good process at Rice Creek at the staff level, specific to the DNR staff that we engage with. But Houston's experience statewide indicates that there is a lack of unity at the state agency as to how it looks at public drainage and reviewing the work to restore functionality, improvement, or otherwise. That is the resolution we want to bring forward.
Okay.
We're suggesting we bring forward.
So I know that's been near and dear to your heart, Steve. Get something done.
Yes.
Apparently, that's kind of near and dear to your heart. It'd be nice to get something done. Can we get something done? I mean, is this the way to get it done? A resolution?
This would be step one. I am not an expert in politics, so I can't claim how the winds will blow from there, but I think this seems like it's step one if it's the board's interest to move forward with it. So,
Mr. President, without making a resolution, that's sending the notice to have a discussion. It's very difficult to have a discussion at the convention without having it noticed early, so people, if you just walk on the floor and start spouting that, it's more difficult. And so I would say the purpose of it is for discussion. The resolution doesn't mean it has to be passed. It means a topic you need to talk about. And
it's a way of restating that this is an issue that's important to us that hasn't been solved.
Yeah.
So I would support proceeding with it. The rest of it, you know, it's been near and dear to your heart.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, board.
It's not a substitute for repealing the act, but it's the best we can do at this time.
Yeah, there you go.
But I'd go along with you.
Board of Managers, thank you. That is additional clarity. We will bring back one resolution proposed to you. We'll work with our partners in other parts of the state to make something that's as unified as possible so that we can articulate well that it's a broad issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay. Very good. Mr. Administrator, what's next?
Yeah, next on the agenda is staff reports.
Anyone have any comments or questions about the staff reports?
Well, Mr. Chair, I appreciate getting them. I appreciate the work that the staff does. I think it shows you that we have set policies and the staff takes the action based on those policies. So even though we're not talking about permits every meeting or the wetland work that's out there, and the ditch cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. It's a busy bunch of folks for sure. So my compliments to them.
Next on the agenda is the August calendar. I'll just make note of this CAC summer tour is on there.
Yes, Kendra invited all of us to join that. I've had to decline, personal reasons, but
Mr. President, I intend to attend it. It's over at New Brighton at the,
Hanson Park.
and well, starting in New Brighton in the City Hall. I've forgotten what the room number is, but 513 and then later, at 5:30 and then later on to go to Hanson Park. But would you tell me what RCWD District Conference Room and remotely means?
Oh, this is not right.
Is that just to confuse me? Oh, that doesn't, so we're not going there. We're going to Hanson Park, New Brighton. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure I was in the right place.
Yes.
This is generally the one out of the year that's, I think, the most fun.
It's most fun.
Manager Bradley, thanks, Manager Waller. We'll get that corrected.
update.
Administrator updates, yes, Board of Managers. The discussion here, notably the last point, 404 jurisdiction versus WACA mitigation. I'm drawing alignment or thoughts about the Metro shooting settlement and your recent discussions about that. And Rice Creek certainly knows its place and limits regarding Wetland Conservation Act. And I would think that those, in my opinion, are would have been just as apparent in 2005 at the time of the settlement as they are to us today. So the work that staff and Smith Partners, Chuck, came to a workshop, I think is factual and doesn't really is the essence of the settlement. And unfortunately, Manager Robinson isn't here. And so under that issue, the district championed an effort for 404 to come into alignment with what we were trying to succeed with here, the SAMP, Special Area Management Plan. That didn't happen, and we cannot control that other parties' 404, the Corps' jurisdiction and how it intends to regulate. So the distinction between what the district's obligation is and what it is not seemed to be clearly laid out at the time of the settlement, and both parties would have been acutely aware of those distinctions. Moving on, ACD 102232, we met with the city of
Before
Columbus.
you move on.
Yeah.
So you raised this issue at this time for what reason?
I raise it because I felt as though there was an essence of the board believing it may have an obligation in the settlement that was not actually present. So Rice Creek can only control the things under its jurisdiction, not what the federal government does.
Correct.
Certainly there's a political side and the sense of community and how the district goes about its operations, but that is not apparent. It is not placed within the settlement. The settlement as a factual document says you'll not make your rules more cumbersome to undermine accomplishing that 100 acres.
So if to encapsulate that
Please.
very complex issue.
Let's, pardon me, Mr. President, but I'm a slow writer, you know.
Yeah.
And the settlement doesn't what? Would you repeat your last sentence, Nick?
It didn't enhance our obligations
Yes.
beyond what they were in state and federal law. Kind of what you said.
Yes, the settlement document was, here's the landscape that we have at this time. We can control Rice Creek and its CWPMP. We cannot control the federal government. That being said, we will do our best to get them to come into alignment. And that's that. We did that effort. And there is no special area management plan under the federal government. And the outcome of that would not be a burden or an obligation of the district to fulfill.
So as I understand it, the big question is what's the federal government going to do after the U.S. Supreme Court decision with regard to whether it's going to claim jurisdiction? And until someone actually approaches them with a proposal, I don't suspect that they're going to want to tell us that.
President Bradley, very observant. Yes, I would agree. And I think that's the very position that the districts repeatedly laid out to the landowner to say, you need a project to really move this forward. Yeah. And they've, with respect to them, it's all very complicated, of course. Their position is, no, I have 100 acres of upland. And it's like, we're at step one. What are you intending to do? Because I can.
How are you going to get there?
Right.
That's the question.
Board of Managers, in my opinion, I think there's roughly, I don't know, 60 acres of upland currently. So that would be, 40 acres of wetland fill. In my wildest dreams, I couldn't see that passing the federal government's needs analysis. But you're right, until that needs analysis and the defined boundaries of the project and what it's trying to accomplish, it really can't be evaluated.
If I remember correctly, we have roughly 40 acres left in the wetland bank.
Yes, sir. I believe that's correct.
Okay. Is there any need for us to get more refinement on our wetland bank commitments beyond the general at this point? I mean, we've had this done before where Houston Engineering looked at the projects we have, known projects we have, and how those known projects will develop. I mean, is this a time to revisit that, or is it wait until we have someone actually asking for something?
Manager Bradley, Board of Managers, I would say to wait. I don't think that we have any new or additional information that would further refine the numbers. I suppose we could plug in what actually happened, and maybe that refines our bottom line a little better. Chris would like to.
Yeah.
Board of Managers, we do have another task order out there that we need to begin working on. Or I have already started working on the next phase of 5362 branches 5 and 6, which also go in that area where the settlement agreement was. And that area is one of the areas we did project out in the future could potentially have a wetland mitigation need. And so when we complete that repair report, that would be a good time to take what we find in our repair report as a likely amount of mitigation that would be needed for that work and plug that back into the spreadsheet then.
All right.
So, coming up here in
What were the branches again,
6 months.
please?
5362 branch 5 and 6.
Anything further?
Yeah, of course. President Bradley, thanks for that, Chris. And yeah, if we plug that back in, the district can forecast, do we need another wetland bank, or are we just going to go to the market and those sorts of things. ACD 102232, there's one where we had contemplated the use of potentially our wetland credit if the DNR in its regulation of public waters would see the need for mitigation and further that our credits were acceptable for that. But that's another story. Just wanted to share that we met with the city representatives from Columbus to collaborate on that. I think it was supportive of moving forward there and bring a response to the board on alternative 4 and its potential to move it forward. I'll share with you that the permit folks dealt with a pre-application on the Bel Air site. Bel Air site is where we de-watered the Long Lake Sediment Basin. We kind of spoke about that before, that it may limit our ability to ever clean out that sediment basin again. We'd have to come up with an alternative way to de-water. Manager Wynant, you saw the large bags, et cetera. If that site's developed, there is no place to do that operation. The county, I would say, is reluctant for us to do it on their parkland. Nevertheless, on Rice Creek, Middle Rice Creek, there's another potential bank stabilization project. In the initial review, it was prioritized. We addressed the prioritization, the highest ones. There are additional ones that could yield some reduction in sediment transport that would be headed down towards Long Lake. Beyond that, I'll just share that periodically staff receive calls for assistance that are outside of our mission and our programs. We do our best. Wet basement, where are my property lines, these types of things. We give them what assistance we can and put them in the right direction as best we can. That's it.
Manager Waller, update?
I just have one comment. We all received in our packet, I believe everybody did, maybe you did it by electronically. I expressed some interest in our comments that the administrator was going to refer to the Bowser. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at them. They read questions and answers. And, these aren't bad answers. I really like the one on number 4 that says monitoring, objective. The first one says, I suggest you read that. It says, it seems that more of a question of how folks work together than versus who. And it basically gets down to talking about local relationships or local places working and how the staff was. So, this isn't too bad an attitude about it, trying to get the Bowser to think about their strategic plan is what I'm talking about. And how does that handshake or work with the local units. So these are some pretty good answers here. Not bad.
Did you see?
No, yeah. Good mark it down, yeah.
Manager Wynant?
I don't have an update. Unfortunately, I was not able to make the Metro mod meeting, so if someone did go.
I did. I sent, I'll see if I can find my email and send it to you that I sent on the notes. I'll do that. So
Okay.
I gave a report to Nick and I'll make sure I send it.
Okay.
Basically, they didn't say much.
Okay.
They said, for example, Bowser said, we're going to increase the Metro grant available to the watersheds in the Metro area. We don't know by how much. So everything was, something's going to happen, but we can't tell you anything. And I walked away a little frustrated.
All right, thank you.
So, Manager Weigerman, I'm looking at Weigerman. Yes,
One thing, piggybacking on what Manager Waller said, I was watching just flipping channels and came across the documentary on Europe on their ditches. And they have open ditches everywhere. And they are light years ahead of us in how they're approaching fixing all of that. And what they're doing is amazing. And they are not, I think they're considered pretty environmental in Europe. And quite frankly, I think it's exactly what Manager Waller is talking about that's keeping us from doing the exact same thing. And it's almost embarrassing. We look like we're in the dark ages compared to what they're doing over there. And I just thought it was fascinating that we could be that far behind. And I think he's hit it right on the head. Why? And so I do think it's important that we do that. and take a look at that. That was the one thing, and that was just a comment. And one other comment I want to make, not directly on the Columbus thing, because it's over, but what makes me kind of sad is that I feel if we'd have started this process by just doing what they asked for, getting in a room, and all they wanted to do was talk about it. And from talking to Pat, what they were looking for, I'd be shocked if we haven't spent more on lawyers and on this whole thing than what they were going to ask for. So it just makes me, I just feel like we could have fulfilled our obligation that was made by our prior president and administrator just by getting in a room, because they didn't commit to doing anything other than discussing it. And we couldn't do that. That was too much. And I just feel like we probably spent more money than we would have if we'd have done it the other way. And I think that's sad. So that's my comments for today.
I have no intention to debate that. Go ahead.
Thank you. President Bradley, just a quick follow-up. I would say I don't see it as over, the Columbus issue, but we're at step 2, and perhaps we've taken the long way around. I guess I wouldn't necessarily endorse that, but I'll leave it there. But importantly, in defense of staff and the actions we do on your behalf, within the letter that came from Columbus, it said something about we weren't notified of the meeting and this kind of thing. We did check, and we did send an email. It went to the city administrator. It's water under the bridge, but they did receive notice of it, and certainly the mayor was present as well as the council person. So
The problem was, in a nutshell, the city didn't give us anything to discuss. They came with a claim that we owed them something undefined from 2009, and we came back and said, we gave you more than you could have ever asked for. That's the basis on which we said we're not going to negotiate against ourselves, because there is nothing to negotiate against ourselves. We owe you nothing at this time. Bring us a proposal, we'll decide whether or not we can do it. And that's where we are, and that's enough of this.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
I'll just finish this quickly. The crux of the Columbus presentation today was they lost 5 acres of tax land. My rebuttal to that is you gained acreage for the tax land from the DNR property when we sold it to the Great Rivers Energy, and we spent 3 credits to develop Turnbeck's property, which increased the value of tax land. So the tax issue or purpose of it, I don't think is a valid contention.
No, it's not. So I have nothing to update. Obviously, I will start working on bringing what I think we need to talk about for legislative purposes for next month or September. Motion to adjourn. I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed. Thank you.
So long.